So all that data collaboration is so crucial because at the end of the day, the resources are limited. And as you said, you want to eliminate these human mistakes and enrich those responders, dispatchers, call takers with as much useful data as possible to actually make the proper decisions and ultimately saving lives.
From Tyler Technologies, it's the Tyler Tech Podcast, where we talk about issues facing communities today and highlight the people, places, and technology making a difference. I'm Beth Amon. I'm the Corporate Marketing Manager here at Tyler, and I appreciate you joining us for another episode of the Tyler Tech Podcast. Today, we're bringing you a special episode featuring an interview with Amir Elichai, the CEO of Carbyne, a company that focuses on innovating public safety computer-aided dispatch software. In this interview, Tyler's Dwayne Keatsman asks Amir about ways to communicate with emergency services through text and video messaging, how to better equip our first responders when arriving on scene, and how governments can leverage technology to better serve all members of their community in need of assistance. Tyler and Carbyne partnered together to make sure that dispatchers have all the information they need to be able to support the individual calling 911. I hope you enjoy their conversation.
Hello, I am Dwayne Keatsman. I'm responsible for our software strategy and vision for first responder applications here at Tyler Technologies. Today, we're going to talk about technology inside an emergency communications centers. For those of you in the US, that's typically when you call 911 or a non-emergency line for a police department. But around the world, there's other numbers, 112, 999, and other countries and different places where emergency communications can happen. It's an industry I personally fell in love with over 15 years ago. And since then, I've been in a dispatch center, inside a police car or fire truck in over 20 different states. And today I'm excited. I'm joined by Amir, the CEO of Carbyne. And Amir, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Duane. Thank you very much for short introduction. So my name is Amir Elichai. I'm currently in Tel Aviv, but I'm actually based in New York for the last 4.5 years. I started Carbyne after a personal experience where I've been robbed in Tel Aviv Beach and tried to call for the first time in my life to emergency services. I was never a call taker, dispatcher, or responder before, but I really saw the need to improve emergency communication. And since then, in the last 8 years, Carbyne built a very powerful ecosystem that is basically taking care of all what is between the citizen to the contact center included, to enhance the ability for emergency services to better respond to emergency events. And we will talk more about what Carbyne is bringing to the table, but in a nutshell, to bring the right forces to the right location at the right time. This is our mission and vision. This is what we're doing. And we're doing that by building multiple different platforms and collaborating with great companies such as Tyler.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in 911 right now. So I think for the average person out there, right, it's going to take a lot for them to pick up a phone and dial 911. And that's what these, great first responders deal with on a regular basis, right? And so I want to take a moment to kind of talk about the inside of an emergency communications center. So you'll have your telecommunicators. Many places, especially the larger centers, will have them separated into two different groups, right? You'll have your call takers, the person that answers the phone, that talks with the citizen, that talks with the caller. And then you'll have your dispatchers. And the dispatchers are the one dealing with the road patrol, the officers, the fire first responders, and others out in the field. And so there's actually a separation there. I think many people don't understand, right? They think when you call 911, you get one person that just does everything. And that is true in some places, but especially as you get into larger centers where you may have hundreds or thousands of first responders out in the field, it's a lot to keep track of what the caller is saying, what they're going through, and then also what the officers in the field are doing, where they are, and how we keep them safe. So what our systems do, both within Tyler and then within Carbyne, help to create efficiency, to help streamline that process, to make it faster, more efficient, easier to use. And so, Amir, I know you guys are especially doing a whole lot on the call taking space. Do you want to dive into kind of, you mentioned the robbery in Tel Aviv and kind of what happened to you and what you're hoping to try and improve from an efficiency perspective around that process?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a short question with a long answer. Because basically, as you said, in the end, you need to understand like the 911 information flow. And the first thing that we've done at Carbyne is basically to understand who are the stakeholders that are actually collaborating from a human perspective, from a tech perspective, in order to take a call, understand what's happening in this call, and send the right forces to the right location. Those three steps that I just described basically involved to date or before Carbyne came into the market, multiple different tech solutions companies that are trying to solve this unique challenge. And we're trying to basically make it as simple as Uber for the citizens. So I'm clicking one button and I'm getting my Uber to the right location. I don't really care about all what's happening beyond the scene. But when we started to explore how the 911 was built and what is in it, we saw that there is a huge fragmentation. And throughout the years, multiple different small niches companies try to address simple things within the 911. But at the end of the day, you're coming to those centers and you see the call taker sitting in front of 12 screens. So the first thing that we did is basically to understand what the call taker's KPIs are, right? And if you ask a call taker in the United States, in those 6,500 PSAPs around the United States, PSAP stands for Public Safety Answering Point, is time to dispatch. To simplify it, time to understand whether or not this event is real and what kind of resources we need to share to that point to this specific person. So we're talking about how you better giving location services, how to streamline location services in a way that the call taker can understand in real time, in addressable, human addressable language where the person is. The second thing, we thought about bringing real-time video into emergency services. So instead of the call taker asking you a bunch of questions, they can actually see what's going on. We're talking about bridging this 911 world into the deaf and hard hearing community. So things like text to 911 and other ways to be able to collaborate with 911. So kind of an omni-channel that gives citizens the ability to share data with call takers and 911 agencies around the world. The second thing that we have done after taking care of the data delivery into the PSAP is basically we understood that in order to simplify deployments, make them much more faster, make upgrade and IT work much more easier, we will have to utilize cloud services. And I will not get into too much tech today, but basically, one of the biggest challenges of this industry was throughout the years how to take 911 calls from the cloud with the same level of service that I used to when I'm dialing 911 through the analog line. And what Carbyne did with companies like Amazon and others, basically built for the first time those contact centers into the cloud, which means that it's much easier to deploy, much faster, much easier to upgrade. Challenges are, rising from time to time. So we just experienced 3.5 years of COVID, which was a new thing for the all 911 industry. So how you basically support those customers in needs and all that, this is what Carbyne is taking care of, from the simple data delivery from citizens to the call taker, and then taking this all call taking space to a new era.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting evolving technology, right? I think when I watch TV shows or movies, right, they always when they interact with 911, the first question is 911, what's your emergency, right? And that was true 15, 20 years ago when every single person called in on a landline. You knew exactly where they were. But today, with the majority, 85 plus, 90 plus percent of calls being made from a cell phone, that context has actually shifted now. Where when you typically dial 911, the first question they're going to ask is, what's your location? Because I don't have to know what's going on to send a responder, right? I have to know where the problem is. If I know what's going on but don't know where it is, I can't send anybody. But if I know where it is, I can start to send people. And so it's important to understand that context, that location first. And you mentioned the multiple monitor setup, and It's also an interesting one for 911 telecommunicators. A lot of them don't think of themselves as tech savvy, yet they sit behind a computer connected to 4 to 6 monitors in most cases. And many of those are running Tyler's computer aided dispatch system. And I love to emphasize the word aided because it's not computer aided dispatch, it's computer aided dispatch. And there's a lot of human elements that go into every single 911 call, right? From what's being said, it's a high stress, high emotion situation. There's a lot of empathy that's brought to the table. But across the different monitors, they may have many different sets of information from all the different units or apparatus on the fire side that are in service and what they're doing, all the 911 active events that are ongoing, and especially in larger places like the city of Orlando is one of our customers, where they have many different events going on simultaneously, to a map that kind of collates the vehicle location and the police that are patrolling, school resource officers, detectives, and everything else that's going on. There's a lot of information. And really, that telecommunicator task, to your point about efficiency and time to dispatch, is to take all that different information from what they're hearing from the caller to now different information coming in from things like vehicle telematics and GPS location and health profiles on phones, all the responders out the field, boil that down and make a decision on how to get the right type of response to that situation in a matter of seconds, right? Typically, you want under 35, 40 seconds is what you're dealing with to the time you want to get responders kind of on the way and going. And so it's a lot of context, a lot of information, a lot of work that goes into that to really try and boil that down. And I love what you guys are doing with some of that newer technology. I actually just had an incident over the weekend where I was working with my parents who needed some help with a technology problem, right? And I think this is a common occurrence for any of us in tech, right? Our parents always call us thinking we're the answer to every computer problem they have. But after walking through it with them over a few minutes over the phone, I was just getting annoyed that I think we weren't quite speaking the same language. And so I asked them, hey, can you just FaceTime me and show me exactly what you're clicking, exactly what you're seeing, and we can walk through it together, right? And it really kind of called back what you guys are doing at Carbyne with some of the video sharing and some of the integration we've done. Now within our computer-aided dispatch application, if that context is going to be helpful, then the telecommunicator can just at a click of a button, click it, and it'll actually send a text message out to the caller and they can share their video via the Carbyne platform. So do you want to talk a little bit about that and how you guys are doing that, Amir?
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned before, I started this business when I've been robbed in Tel Aviv Beach, and I tried to call for the first time in my life to emergency services. And one of the questions that I got from this call taker at the time in the Israeli police force was really to try and understand what's happening in this specific event. And then I thought to myself, in these days my kids are using FaceTime, as you just said. Why I cannot just FaceTime with the police department? And this is basically how Carbyne initially started, with bridging data specifically around videos to 911 and the ability to bring the call takers and eventually the officers a kind of a real-time footage of the scene. And think about so many different events. You have someone having stroke on the floor, having the paramedic or the call taker actually see the severity of the event. If the person is breathing, not breathing, you talked about prioritization, can really help him to prioritize whether you need an ambulance, maybe you need a doctor in the ambulance to take care of the person on the spot because they will not have enough time to take it to the hospital, etc., etc. So those in kind of a medical event. Think about fire events. If there is a fire in New York City, and if it's in the 30th floor or on the ground level, it's totally changing the way that those units are responding to this specific event. If there is an active shooter event, what the person usually in those events, there is a huge mess. Think about the event that was in Las Vegas a few years ago. There is a mess. People are running all over the place. You have police officers dispatching to this specific event, but how the person is looking, what kind of a gun he have. He have a Glock, he have a shotgun, he have a M16. So it's really also impacting the way that those responders are responding to the event. And then when we started with video streaming and we delivered in 2022 more than 1 million minutes of video to emergency services worldwide, there was like a new kind of a challenge arise. And actually, was a request came out of Miami-Dade, which is one of our customers. So one of the commissioners said, listen, we have a huge problem of responder safety. This becomes our number one KPI. We are sending responders to the field, but they're coming totally blind. And then they need to make decisions. So what we created, and this is part of what we are doing together with Tyler, is not that only we are streaming this data from the citizens to the dispatch platform, but also taking this video and share it with the responding units so they can actually decide if there is a hostage situation in a school, if there is an active shooter situation, so they can, on the driving to the event, understand whether we need to take this street or that street, whether we need additional units. Maybe one police car is enough according to what we are seeing in real time. So all that data collaboration is so crucial because at the end of the day, the resources are limited. And as you said, you want to eliminate human mistakes and enrich those responders, dispatchers, call takers with as much useful data as possible to actually make the proper decisions and ultimately saving lives.
Yeah, I think that use case, especially on fire, is huge, of trying to get a citizen to explain fire dynamics to a firefighter, right? These firefighters, I think a lot of people don't know this, they are very well trained in fire dynamics. They go, they look, they know how oxygen flows. In many cases, they'll actually take a saw and cut a hole in the roof to get air flowing in certain directions to kind of help either create ventilation or deal with ventilation. And so rather than having your average citizen try and explain that information, get a real video stream of it right out to a battalion chief and the fire force who can actually start to give good context with their background and training and information and add that in.
We'll be right back with more from our conversation.
I hope you're enjoying listening to this episode of the Tyler Tech Podcast. I'm Jade Champion, and I'm here with Dana Rasmussen to talk about video messaging in 911 technology. Hey Dana, you've been listening to the podcast. What have you found most interesting about the way video messaging is helping 911 dispatchers and first responders have more access to mission-critical information?
Hey Jade, I am always so impressed by what goes on behind the scenes in a dispatch center. Knowing that community members can send video messages when making a 911 call shows how the industry is committed to sending better and safer responses.
I know, there's always so much happening when someone makes a 911 call. Didn't we recently just create a flyer discussing the benefits of video messaging for dispatchers, first responders, and communities?
Yes, we did. With Tyler and Carbyne's partnership, the public safety space has yet another tool they can use to improve responses and make communities safer. Do you think we can link the flyer in the show notes so our listeners can read and learn more?
Definitely. Check out the show notes and stay tuned for future news about public safety innovation. Now let's get back to the Tyler Tech Podcast.
You mentioned earlier too, the deaf and hard of hearing community, which is, has kind of been notoriously difficult to interact with 911. The infrastructure is built around voice calls. And I think there's another area there with language disparity, right? I think those are some of the most difficult situations that telecommunicators can deal with, both in the fact that they're not as common, right? They're not what they're used to dealing with in many places, but also what has to happen in that process today. And so many centers have a phone service that they can add into to deal with these types of language, or a video relay service in dealing with the deaf and hard of hearing community. But those take time, right? They can take up to 1 to 2 minutes, which does not sound like a ton of time, but when you're trying to do all this in 30 seconds, delaying it by 2 minutes can feel like an hour. And if anyone has called 911, I've personally witnessed an accident, had to call, and I've sat on hold for 1 minute and 57 seconds while waiting for a telecommunicator to pick up. It feels very, very long. And when the telecommunicator and caller can't understand each other, those minutes are a huge area for misunderstanding to happen, right? Where they expect something to be happening, or they're not understanding what's going on, or they position themselves in a bad situation. I know this is an area that Carbyne, specifically from your call handling side, is really focused on making a difference. Do you want to talk about what you guys have just recently launched with that technology, Amir?
Yeah, for sure. So for the listeners, currently in the United States, you have around 250 million calls to 911 every year. Out of those calls, around 10% are calls that are used by translation lines. Translation lines, if you compare it to a regular call duration, which usually it's like 1.5 minutes, the dispatch happening before, but usually it's like 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes, where the call taker is trying to aggregate as much data as possible by asking the caller more and more questions. Translation line calls, the calls that are held by translation lines will take 6 to 8 minutes. This is in the case that the call takers can really recognize the actual language that the person is speaking. So if it's Spanish or Arabic or any kind of a very common language within the United States, this is pretty easy. But if there is a certain Chinese language or German or Deutsch or any kind of a not so common language, this can take much longer. And as we all understand, time in emergency response is everything. So basically what Carbyne did using sophisticated AI tools was, first of all, to solve the challenge for the call taker to understand in real time what the language that the person is speaking by leveraging AI capabilities that can recognize between 3 to 5 seconds what the person language that is calling in speaks. So automatically, as I'm dialing into 911, I can speak Spanish and or any other language, like 11 languages that we are supporting in these days, and the system will show me Spanish speaker detected. Okay, we're doing it just by listening to the call, and with the sophisticated AI capabilities, we can tell that. Now we are starting to do real-time translation that appears on the video in our call-taking platform. So I can basically speak as a call taker with a citizen. The citizen will speak his own language, and I can see exactly what he's saying in my own language. This is what we learned something like 4 months ago. But then we launched it in production in a few of our customers in Texas, in New Orleans, and other places. And the second request was, this is great. This is, save us a lot of time because we can understand actually what the person is saying and we can see it. But we want to talk back and the person don't speak our language. So now we developed a speech to speech capability that a call taker can actually speak his own language, again, English in the US case, and the caller will hear it in his current, language. So in Spanish in this specific case. This not only helps, for the actual call, this can help to better quality assurance, better training. In the future, we believe that transcription, translation will move into a new kind of application. As an example, we can alert and notify in real time the director, the supervisors, the mayor about certain events that are happening within the city before someone is actually calling them post-event and giving them the update. We can show you over a city where you have more calls from what kind, and all this kind of analytics is very interesting and important, which again, ultimately will improve the efficiency of those operations and will make them kind of a much, much better. Now, collaborating with companies like Tyler, in the dispatch side, you have tons of data. Some of this data is being brought to the system manually by dispatchers that are putting in, the information. And one of the thinking process that we have is how can we simplify the work of the dispatchers in order to, again, eliminate human mistakes and improve the efficiency and get the proper forces to the right location in the right time. But with collaboration between Carbyne and Tyler, as an example, with filling in information automatically and simplify and make it much more easier for the dispatcher to fulfill their duties.
Yeah, I think that's one of our joys in technology, right? Is that our job is never done. There's always something new, always something next, right? And so, as we got this integration going, we started talking, okay, what's next? And how can we use that language detection and even start to recommend, say, a patrol officer that's certified by the department as a Spanish-speaking translator, right? And get them on the scene at the same time and do that behind the scenes automatically. So it's not a human thought process that has to go make sure they include an officer that speaks Spanish in that type of event. And that really speaks to one of our main visions here at Tyler Tech, and that's connected communities. We want to make sure that citizens, businesses, governments, and everyone are working together to really create vibrant, healthy, and engaged communities. And one of the areas that we're focusing with this is in connecting these 911 centers. Many of them are entirely disconnected. If you live on the borderline between two different counties, they may use two different phone systems, two different technology systems, two different computer systems. And in many cases, there really isn't a bridge to connect them. And that exists even within a specific county, whether it's a college or a university that has their own police force, or even on the medical side. I think many listeners would probably be surprised to find that many places across the U.S., medical response, say an ambulance, is not directly tied or linked in with 911. Those are separate, private type companies that are dealing with medical and medical transport. And so even in my local county here in Michigan, we're working with them to digitally connect that 911 center with that ambulance company. Like I said, it's a private business. And so that's an area that we're looking at trying to make sure that that data can seamlessly flow back and forth. And so as that call comes in, the location, all the verbal information that was collected, all the things that the dispatcher and the telecommunicator typed into the system can digitally transfer over to that center. So it's not the call taker picking up, listening to what the caller's saying, and then putting it on hold while they call the ambulance company, relaying all that information all over again, and then going back to the caller. And so, Amir, I know you guys are working with ambulance companies as well. What are you doing and working on in that space?
Yeah, this is actually a very interesting use case. We collaborated with a company called GMR, Global Medical Response, which became later on our investor in the business, where they searched for a next-gen 911 system to enhance their, medical response to medical events that are happening throughout 45 states in the United States. So the GMR use case, GMR are basically a secondary PSAPs to large metropolitan areas. So as an example, in Washington, D.C., the ambulance providers are, in this specific case, is GMR. So GMR is basically giving all the ambulance services and all the emergency medical services to Washington, D.C. But what does it mean? Basically, someone calls into 911, the call taker is saying this is a medical event. They are rerouting the call into this medical center, which basically a trained professional from GMR is basically answering the calls and start to manage the event, which again relates to sending an ambulance, etc. So as we are doing in the regular police or law enforcement use cases, having an understanding of what's going on in the event is crucial, right? Understand if the person that is calling in now is what condition, if he's breathing, not breathing, what kind of direction we can give to a certain person that is calling about his kid that is on the floor now choking. How do I do a CPR? Having the ability to see in real time and give instructions prior to arriving to an event, this is crucial in medical situations. Now, even if the ambulance is driving to an event, the paramedic or the doctor in the ambulance can open a laptop and basically continue to communicate while driving to an event. Those are the things that basically we are collaborating on with GMR. Besides that, we have an interesting platform that we've developed together with GMR to address nationwide assets allocation to a natural disaster, which is a separate from purely just 911. GMR have a big federal operation and commitments. We're working with the federal government, and part of their duties is to allocate resources between states across the United States for certain mega events that are happening in certain states. So the ability to visualize everything, to prioritize resources allocation, to dispatch, huge fleets between states and all that is also managed by Carbyne. But the initial idea and the reason that we engaged together with GMR is how to provide better services to the citizens that are now being taken care of GMR services in a specific country, in specific states.
Yeah, and I think that the medical example you gave earlier was an interesting one. I think even something as simple as having, someone's daughter or son try and pronounce a medication, right? We've all read those labels and try to do them. I'm not a doctor myself, right? So I have trouble pronouncing them. My sister's a nurse, and when we talk, she'll be like, oh, that medication. I'm like, oh, that's how you say it. I had no idea. And so you ask someone who's there to like, do you see any pills? Do you see any bottles? Do you see any medications that they're on? And trying to get that information as a caller versus, can you just take a picture of the side of that and sending that out to the paramedic or someone that's trained in that situation can help make that much, much faster. So I think there's a lot of interesting little things that adding this extra rich data into what has traditionally been a voice call, I think can help create efficiency going forward.
I do have one example for that. The 911 environment is constantly changing as the new technologies arise, but challenges are also, there is new challenges that are arising from time to time. One of them was when COVID started, the ultimate, first phone call was to 911. So agencies working with Carbyne started to experience a huge influx of calls, even though the call takers were not really trained to address whether this person needs to go to the doctor, yes or no, needs to go to the hospital. And if you remember initially when COVID just started, the number one goal was to reduce the panic and say, hey, you don't need to run to the hospital because this is number one result of spreading of COVID happening in those corridors in the hospitals. So one of our customers, New Orleans, came with a creative idea where they utilized Carbyne video capabilities together with Responder Connect. But in this case, the responders were not the actual responders, the traditional responders. They bridged in paramedics, nurses, doctors that worked in hospitals. So when is calling and saying, hey, I can't breathe, something is happening to me, calm down, sir. Can I see your face? Just a second. Let me bridge in an experienced nurse, not necessarily working in the New Orleans facility. They all can see each other and they can say, sir, you can stay home. Everything is okay. And we helped New Orleans to reduce the expansion rate of COVID, like 2 weeks after we started to work with them. This was a very creative way to utilize technology and video specifically, okay, to reduce COVID spread in the city of New Orleans.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting as we look forward with telehealth and other stuff, continuing to evolve and what that means both for 911, for first responders, and for the industry as a whole. So thank you for joining me today, Amir. To close out, as a CEO that's traveled the world, I'd love to get kind of your take on one lesson that your job has taught you that you think everyone should learn at one point in their life.
Wow, this is a hard one. I think, when you believe in your mission and you have a passion for it and you see the end goal, you should do all what it takes in order to make it happen. I can tell you that the beginning of Carbyne was not easy. As you know better than me, probably, Dwayne, this market is not really welcoming changes. And we had to fight hard to get into to get the trust, the credibility, and build a relationship. But, after we fought so hard in order to educate the market about the goods that we can provide, and we kind of almost blindly believed in a mission that we are seeing at the end, the results are amazing. The feedbacks are amazing. To get a call from a woman that we just served her baby or deliver a baby for her. And we had so many cases like that. It's super satisfying. And I couldn't be more proud of leading that company and collaborate with companies like Tyler to fulfill our vision that we started with a few years ago.
Yeah, I think that's great, is looking to the end and believing in that and believing in yourself. I think it's only fair that I answer too. So I would say, one of the things I think is important is to have empathy for others, right? In being in so many centers and seeing it, when I talk to people that don't work in this industry, I always say, imagine what it would take for you to actually pick up your phone right now and dial the numbers 911, right? Most people have dialed or will dial 911 once or twice in an entire lifetime, right? And those are the calls that these individuals deal with 12 hours a day, 3 to 4 days a week, right? Or they respond to in person, face to face, 12-hour shifts every single day. And so they talk with these people in their most difficult moments and help them get through it. And you really never do know what people are going through. And so it's an interesting and challenging industry. It's why I fell in love with it, over 16 years ago at this point. And, I appreciate folks like you coming in and providing a little bit of spark and momentum to kind of keep things moving forward and really push the bounds of what kind of the humans and the people can do alongside of technology. And I think that's really when change starts to happen is when everything works together and we create this experience that's both easy to use, but also creates positive outcomes in these emergency situations. And so with that, thanks for joining me today, Amir, and hope you like the show. If you have any questions, you can visit both our websites, tylertech.com. Amir, do you want to say Carbyne's?
Yeah, carbyne.com.
Yep, and that's Carbyne with a Y, so Carbyne. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Looking to learn more about the topics discussed today? Check out the show notes for resources from Tyler and Carbyne, or visit tylertech.com/public safety. Thanks again to Amir and Dwayne for sharing their conversation with us. It was really interesting to learn more about how our governments can better equip our first responders to serve their communities with technology. For Tyler Technologies, I'm Beth Amon. Thanks for joining us. We're looking to learn more about you and what you want to hear more of on the Tyler Tech Podcast. Fill out our audience survey in the show notes today to let us know how you heard of the show and what you want more of. And don't forget to rate and review the show wherever you get your podcasts.